our clients.
Call T. Madden and Associates at 833-PAID-123. That's 833-PAID-123.
Q Time is a classic Atlanta soul food restaurant located in the historic West End. Q Time Soul Food is a family business started by Fred and Christine Crenshaw. Come on in, relax, and sink your chops into our tantalizing, mouth-watering, distinctive soul food with a twist, the Q Time way. 1120 Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard, or call your order in at 404-758-2881. Do you miss your mama's cooking? Then come on down to Q Time, an Urban Passport member.
The Cavil Group is a Florida-based marketing and training consulting firm. We help businesses communicate to their target audience and engage them in conversation. We also help to expand their audiences, which will ultimately result in growth for those organizations. In addition to being a certified constant contact specialist, my colleagues and I are also certified in John Maxwell Leadership Principles. We use these proven principles to conduct workshops, training, and private coaching sessions for individuals and companies looking to take things to the next level. Contact us to schedule a free consultation. Issues today, don't delay, call Cavil.
Since 2002, Empowerment Resources, Inc., a nonprofit organization, has empowered more than 1,500 youth and adults in Duval and surrounding counties through its programs Journey into Womanhood, Girls Mentoring, Life Skills for Teens, and Parenting Education Coaching. To get involved with programs, volunteer, or donate, visit www.empowermentresourcesinc.org. Follow us on social media, facebook.com/empowerment.resources and instagram.com/empowermentjax.
Are you hungry for authentic Caribbean food? Like jerk chicken, oxtail, red snapper, shrimp, tofu, and rasta pasta? Well, find your way over to Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, 180 Auburn Avenue, right next to Royal Peacock in downtown Atlanta.
Them belly full, but we hungry.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, open daily from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. And on Friday and Saturday, we're open till 4 a.m. Come to Mango's and put some spice in your life.
Oh, we've got a good thing going.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, 180 Auburn Avenue, right next to Royal Peacock in downtown Atlanta. For more info or directions, call 404-698-3992 or log on to mangoscaribbeanrestaurant.com. For instant coupons, text MANGOS to 313131.
Tell your mama hungry, papa hungry, brother hungry.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, authentic Caribbean cuisines.
Open up the door, tell them mama hungry.
The human voice has always connected audiences with experiences. Major brands all across America have trusted Kever's voice time and time again. Conversational, powerhouse, intelligent, and sincere. That's the voice you need for your creative marketing process. KEAVERSVOICE.com. Kever's Voice, Kever's Voice, KeversVoice.com. Always on, all the time.
From novice
yeah. I love my HBCU, and boy, I love it, love it. I love it, love it. I love my HBCU, and man, I hope my team they won. Yeah. I hope my team they won. Yeah, man. I hope my team they won. I hope my team they won. Yeah. I tune into the HBCU Sports Lab to see if my team won or lost. If they lost, I'm quiet as a mouse. But if they won, keep tab. I'ma do the dab, yeah. Dr. Cavil, he know what he be talking about. Mike and Charles, they know what they be talking about. They compress the analytic data with your hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they won or lost, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
This is Dr. Cavil with Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop. Mike Washington is like kind of on assignment, not on assignment. He might join us today, might not. I told you, I promise. He's stuck in traffic, got off the plane. We'll see.
Purgatory.
How you doing? What
doing
you
well, Doc.
What?
I said he's in purgatory. He's somewhere in between. He's
He's
trying to get there, but not there yet.
Right, exactly. Welcome to episode 360 inside the HBCU Sports Lab radio show and podcast, a show that's covering the sporting HBCU dash for all things HBCU sports. For institutions large and small, from the NAIA to the NCAA, we share insights and information on the HBCU sports culture and HBCU athletic aesthetics to facilitate the story of athletic programs in the business of HBCU sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kenyatta, Cavil, on my co-host, Mike Washington, Charles Bishop. Charles Bishop running solo dolo today. So we're filming from our home studios and sending a signal live, KSWA's 12:30 a.m. studio with the Texas Radio Hall of Famer, multi-Hall of Famer Ralph Cooper in the beautiful home, Texas Southern University from Houston, Texas. In seriousness, we do believe that we will have Mike being able to join us some part of the show, but we'll hold it down as we do until he's able to get strapped up, booted, and suited and ready to get the camera on, as you know. With that said, today's episode of Inside the HBCU Sports Lab was sponsored by THE Agency, LLC. THE Agency is a consulting company that provides sporting and educational consulting and data analytics. With that being said, Charles, how you doing today?
Doing well, Doc. Looking forward to some great games this weekend. I'll be doing a little play-by-play myself this weekend with Miles and Tuskegee. So looking forward to catching all the action this weekend. And if you're out and about, got some great games to catch. Got a huge one here in Houston this weekend as well. So if my class is listening, you know your assignment. You know your assignment for Saturday. So.
I like it. That's how you make it happen. Get it going. With that being said, one of the hot news coming off there is SWAC Challenge on Thursday revealed its future matchups that will be played in Atlanta through 2026. So they extended out essentially, 3 more years in terms of games that they had announced. The contract went to 2026 anyway, but they announced those last 3 years of matchup. One of the names were out there, but we found out who a team was going to play in 2024, 25, 26, inside of 2023 as well. What's your thoughts in terms of some of these matchups as we found out in 2023 challenge? Obviously, as you know, coming up this year is South Carolina State, Jackson State in a rematch of the 2021 Celebration Bowl, won by the Bulldogs. In 2024, it's Norfolk State and FAMU. Southern, which had agreed to play in 2025 MEAC Challenge, scheduled to play current HBCU national champions North Carolina Central. In 2026, rounds out the last date that we hadn't heard from SWAC or MEAC, with South Carolina State coming back into action and facing off last year MEAC SWAC Challenge team, Alabama State. So we see it extending out. What are your thoughts in terms of these matchups for the announcement that extended until 2026?
You know, all are intriguing matchups, but what jumped out at for me was you have 3 SWAC East teams through 2026 and 1 SWAC West team. But all of these SWAC East teams, fervent following. So you should have a tremendous outpouring of fan support with regards to on the SWAC side. And then, of course, Southern, the Jag Nation. They have a tremendous fan base in the Atlanta area as well. So, but all of these matchups are tremendously intriguing when you really take a look at it. FAMU and Norfolk State, Jackson State, South Carolina State renewing that Celebration Bowl from a couple of years ago, and then Southern and North Carolina Central, especially when you take a look at a lot of the symmetry with both programs, with Trey Oliver having ties to Southern as well. So all intriguing matchups, looking forward to it through 2026. And as always, Lord said the same, we'll be there, Dr. Bill.
You so right about that. And I like the symmetry that you talked about with the connection of Coach Oliver with North Carolina Central in his time at Southern. I agree with that. That's interesting. Alabama State, South Carolina State, that's going to be fascinating, because I believe Alabama State and South Carolina State play Alabama State this year on the schedule. So we'll see that turn around and be a MEAC game similar to you see rematches with South Carolina State and Jackson State. So fascinating to kind of see these things going on there. To some degree on the SWAC side, I'd like to see maybe a little more diversity in the teams. Southern hadn't been in a while. Jackson, Alabama State just in there. But oftentimes it's due to schedule, matchups. I do like the point that you made, which always makes it intriguing in terms of a matchup with the East teams having big followings, including Southern coming out of the West. All those programs have significant followings, short trips for a lot of fan bases in the area, particularly for those teams in the West. You get the first time, we knew this was happening, but you get the first time that FAMU comes to play in the SWAC Challenge as a SWAC member, which is a little bit of fascinating to see what that looks like in terms of things coming out right now. With that being said, what other news out there that you want to share?
Oh, sure thing. So let's take a look at this. And I thought this was really intriguing. This was featured in HBCU Game Day. But headline is Jackson State sees a big jump in social media engagement. And I think that's, pretty significant when you take a look at what is being said here. Jackson State University Athletics posted the fourth highest increase in social media engagements in the nation in 2022 compared to 2021. And that's according to the website skullsparks.com. So Jackson State was, quite a point of interest for quite a few fan bases, as well as the Jackson State fan base itself, but to in some way be a part of it with pregame show. I think that was significant. So when I saw that, it caught my eye. So, and you had quite a few entities out there, 1400 Club, quite a few people that have been talking Jackson State football. So Jackson State football, Jackson State athletics has really moved the needle in 2022.
Good points. When you talk about it, usually we'd say Jackson State was on the tip of people's tongue.
Yeah.
But when you talk about social media engagement, I guess you have to say that Jackson State was on the tip of people's fingers in terms of fingertips. Let's get it in there. So fascinating when you talk about that, a little bit of what that looks like. It was another interesting thing that I saw today that is not directly related to HBCU. It's a Black institution in terms of their enrollment, but Chicago State got some buzz today as they announced members of their new sports exploratory committee. It came out a little bit a while ago that they were talking about with a tweet that kind of drew a lot of interest. They're going to look at developing football at the FCS level. If people recall, going back to history a little bit, part of that was there were the reports that came out that Chicago State may be joining the MEAC. Some of the reports suggested that essentially the athletic directors had voted yes. It came out later that the actual presidents, chancellors voted no. But the major reason that you heard that they voted no is because Chicago State wouldn't make a commitment to football. People may not realize this, that currently Chicago is operating as an independent program in terms of not being affiliated with the conference. For a while they were with the WAC. When WAC brought football back to the FCS level, they didn't have it. They basically were moved out of that conference. And so they're looking for a home. It's hard to survive in this day and age as an independent. People of Notre Dame, you've heard maybe some of the bigger brand HBCUs being independent. But if you really think in terms of reality, you don't programs. BYU, in terms of the football program, was independent for a while. Other sports were a member of the Big West out there in terms of that conference affiliation for basketball and the other sports. And most recently, you see it join the Big 12 to give you some understanding of that. Even Notre Dame that I mentioned there, while they're independent in football, everybody is quite aware of, I'm sure by now, that all of their other sports play in the ACC. So to be independent in all sports is extremely challenging, expensive, and difficult. So if you're going to spend that money and you find a way to do it, you want to maintain your Division I classification. Getting a football program that you can get a conference affiliation, you can see why there is major interest in them doing that. And does that now, would that open the door to MEAC affiliation? So I'm interested to see and keep my eyes on this in terms of what this may look like for Chicago State.
What would be the advantage for Chicago State, where they are geographically located, to joining the MEAC? I'm curious how did that rumor,
sometimes we
how did that get started?
No, I think that's a good question. I think sometimes you have truly marriages of convenience. I mean, let's be frank with you. MEAC would like to add membership. They want to obviously make sure the quality membership, there's a match in terms of autonomy of the program. Some people instantly think HBCUs, which makes a lot of sense. But if you're talking about HBCUs, you're either asking your two current members to bring football into the program. Obviously, Maryland Eastern Shore is the one that you've heard a little bit, but that's kind of gone dormant, you know, in terms of them being able to get that done. And so the other framework is Division II, getting those programs to come up. We hadn't seen a lot of serious dialogue about that taking place. Obviously, I told a lot of folks that you probably wouldn't hear more about that until the conclusion of the transformation information came out. That recently came out. And so there's going to be some intrigue to see, now that you have put an analysis to that, is there room for division programs that want to go through that process and reclassify the Division I? We hadn't really heard that. So now your option in some ways is Chicago State. They're looking for a conference. You're looking for members. Even though it's pretty spread, the need to have conference affiliation would make more sense. Chicago State, in a lot of ways, it's almost a no-brainer. As I said earlier, you got to find a way to be affiliated with a conference for your membership, just for participation. So if that means spending money on football, a lot of that money that you're spending on travel, just as an independent, will reduce some. So that means you still have to use it in terms of playing in football. It's not bad. And if you think about football, you're playing, 3 games, if you would? 4 games on the road, the other 3 at home. So you're talking about 3 or 4 trips. And so you look at that and reducing your costs in other sports in some ways. You know how you've seen the regionalization in terms of being able to look at travel. So that changes some. So if you can do pods, there's different ways that you can find a way essentially to reduce travel in your Olympic sports. And so that's a part of it. The connection with Chicago State for the brand of the MEAC, it helps. It does get MEAC into a major market of Chicago, which obviously can do some things in terms of recruiting academically, recruiting in terms of athletes, but also in terms of just your academic students as well, in terms of getting that market. So while it may not be quite as obvious because it's not in the natural geographic footprint, there are a lot of ways where you can see where it could be a marriage of convenience during this time when you're trying to grow. So I think that would be a lot of it there.
Sure.
What other news that you got that you want to point out?
Well, yeah, let's take a look at, we'll talk a little bit of the mid-majors today, but let's take a look at the CIAA Players of the Week. And we start off with the men's, Food Line Men's Player of the Week in CIAA is Robert Osborne. Virginia Union Robert Osborne continues his stellar play this season by leading the Panthers to a pair of conference wins while averaging 29.5 points and 9.5 rebounds per game on 77% shooting from the field last week in an 86-60 win over Bowie State. The senior needed only 24 minutes to tie a career high, Dr. Cavil, 34 points. And then he comes back, he shoots 15 of 19 and added 7 boards and an assist against the Bulldogs in a 74-72 win over Lincoln. He went 9 of 12 from the field, 8 of 12 from the free throw line for 26 points and added 11 rebounds and 3 assists. So he's somebody who really fills up the stat sheet. We'll take a look at the defensive player of the week. It is Amadou Faye from Elizabeth City State. He racked up 14 blocks and 13 rebounds in 2 games last week with the Vikings in their 71-65 win over Bowie State. And get this, Doc, the sophomore recorded 9 blocks, 9 points, and 5 rebounds. The Car Senegal native added 8 points and 8 rebounds and 5 blocks against Virginia State. So those were your CIAA players of the week, offensive and defensive on the men's side.
Man, nice. You're giving some of the mid-majors some love. I like where you going, man. That is all right. When you make sure that you spread the love. But that being said, I'm going to go off the radar a little more as well. Lincoln University out of Missouri, the HBCU program there, joins the GLBC. That is the Great Lakes Valley Conference in all sports. They become the 15th member of the GLVC. They were previously a member of the MIAA, I should say, which is the Mid-American Intercollegiate Athletic Association at the Division II level. They've been a part of that conference since 2010. So interesting to see what this move is like. Obviously, both programs are excited about the move to Great Lakes. Some teams churned out of the Great Lakes, so I guess they're trying to increase the membership or sustain the membership. Lincoln, Missouri sees it as a better match in some ways. So it's fascinating to see what this looks like. But again, I always talk about conference churning. This is another example where it always churns when you talk about people trying to find some type of fit for various reasons. So I was intrigued what that took place. Also, we talked about last week with Talladega adding women's gymnastics. They now have a coach, Ada Sims Fletcher, former SEC champion, is getting it done. She was an Alabama gymnast that won a champion. So she will take over the helms of the program. So you're talking about getting somebody that has performed at the highest level in terms of collegiate ranks, and particularly when you're talking about she's a champion. So it'd be fascinating to see how she could battle. What I love about this, while obviously the competition is going to be intriguing, you see what's going on for this, but now you get a little bit of that HBCU battle. So what type of rivalry does this become in terms of what it's like? Obviously, they're not in the same conference in terms of their other sports, with Talladega in the Southern Conference and Fisk in the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference. But still, with some of those competitions in terms of gymnasts, when they enter in the same competition, it'll be fascinating to see how much of the HBCU culture that we talk about, which you see Fisk already infusing in terms of gymnastics. How does that wrap it up maybe a little more when you have the natural competition with everybody else? In particular, what it means in terms of two HBCUs fighting it out to show that in a lot of ways that they have the best gymnastic programs in general, specifically in terms of HBCUs among each other.
Well, we come back out of break, Doc. I want to ask a question because it's very intriguing to me with these gymnastics programs starting at these particular schools. And I saw in regards to Lincoln, they're adding sports as well. So I want to ask a question when we come back to break on it.
Appreciate it. We'll come right back after this break. We'll get into the mid-page top 5 poll rankings. We'll do women's and men's. But before we give that and tease it out, we're going to let Charles ask the question. And we'll see if we can give some dialogue and continue this talk, because you know if Charles will ask a question, it's going to be a good one. So I'm going to my thinking cap on, my other professor cap, come back out of the dean's office. We'll be right back after this break.
From novice to aficionado, find yourself here. High quality cigars plus personal customer service. Slow Burn is Waco's only mobile cigar lounge, featuring a meticulous, curated collection of premium cigars. Visit our website, www.slowburnwaco.com. That's www.slowburnwaco.com.
Shop Velvet Online Women's Boutique to spice up your closet with trendy, unique looks. We have fashionable and chic looks at very affordable prices. Velvet Boutique offers free shipping all year long on all orders. Shop online at www.melvetboutique.com. That's www.melvetboutique.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram. Shop Velvet Online Women's Boutique.
Trust the analytic data with your hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they wanna lose, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
This is Dr. Bill with Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop. Mike Washington is on assignment, trying to basically get in. We'll see if he can make it happen as he's deep playing, and you know how that goes. See if he can find him a quiet corner to get the cameras up and running. With that being said, Charles had a question he wanted to bring to the table. Let's make sure we can get it out there for the people.
I wanted to ask this question in regards to the barriers to entry in terms of creating new sports. We see Fisk has his gymnastics teams. Talladega looks like they're going in the same direction. And I noticed even with Lincoln or Missouri, they're adding sports as they as they come into this new conference in the Grand Lakes Valley Conference. But I was curious about the barriers to entry. Are they lower when you are at a Division II sort of situation where you can add sports and it not cost as much, or what is the case with it?
Yeah, that certainly is one component of it in terms of the barriers of entry, as you put it, which is a perfect way to say it. There's a couple of things there. One is lower costs, but it's not necessarily lower costs for the program itself. You still got to provide scholarships. You see, in terms of gymnastics, as you notice, even though they are an NIA program in their other sports, they're competing what we see as NCAA programs. But oftentimes in sports like hockey, you've seen for a while, I should say more of these newer sports like lacrosse, as it kind of grows. Obviously, in this case, gymnastics, you'll see this with cheerleaders. You see with bowling, where as a sport becomes ingrained and goes to the NCAA or NIA, oftentimes they'll be governed by a whole different entity. So like hockey, a lot of times, even though they play an NCAA championship, you'll see memberships are not necessarily in a conference until what is the program that came over that was a big time program in hockey, men's hockey. It's a D3 program in all other sports, but they play in the Big Ten, Hopkins University, right? And the reason they play, even though the D3, they could be Division I in that sport. You see it in baseball for a while, and that was before the rule. Remember, we asked the commissioner, could baseball come up? And they changed the rule. Now, they grandfathered all programs that were already in there. You had that with Dallas Baptist. They're Division II, at one time, NAIA program and everything else. They were Division I in baseball, and they petitioned to come up to have that one sport that you could play at the Division I, as long as it wasn't men's or women's basketball or football. You could do it with other sports. And so a lot of ways is how they grow a sport until it gets enough where it can become a independent registered program with the NCAA where it can hold championships, because there's a minimum threshold that the NCAA requires for the number of schools you have to have a NCAA offered championship at a various Division I, at a various level. And so sometimes you'll have a championship and it will be across the classifications versus just being Division I. So that's one thing that they can still compete as the NAIA program with the other sports, but gymnastics, because of how it's governed, they can play that and have competitions against Division I. The other part of it is because they're NIA, they don't have to have as many sports. So if you don't have as many sports, they're not spending as much money on all the sports as if you're a Division I program.
Sure.
So if you have the Division I program and you're adding a sport, you're adding that sport at its cost above what you're already paying at the Division I level. At a Division II level, obviously, you're spending less money overall. Part of that is less scholarships, obviously, but the other part of that is you don't not required to have as many sports at the Division II level as you had at the Division I level. So now you can add a sport that may have a lower barrier of cost to it, but also your overall operating program costs lower. So those are the second and third components of why the barrier entry is lower. And it's not just based on the sport itself, but you got to think about all the ancillary things that go around with the program. So great question. And hopefully some folks got a little more information on what that looks like. Let's jump into these polls as we get into the mid-major on the women's side. We'll start with week number 3. Teams that are dropping out in terms of the polls, we'll get that to you. Now, dropping out of this week's poll is Savannah State. Savannah State Tigers 12-4, 8-3, having a great season, but they fall out of the polls after a tough week. And what some other programs did great for their week, it jumps them into the top 5. But before we get in those top 5, let's talk about those that are receiving votes. Savannah State Tigers, while they're outside of the top 5, they're still receiving votes, and the highest one receiving votes in 13. Then you had the Miles Bears, 12-5, 9-4, having a really solid season themselves. Both those programs out of the SIAC, as you know. Fayetteville State Broncos, the last one receiving votes at 5 out of the CIAA. Let's jump into the top 5 programs. Lincoln, Pennsylvania Lions out of the CIAA are 14-5, 8-1. Not ranked last week. They jumped into the poll rankings there. You see a little different. I may have sent the wrong one there, but with that being said, at number 4, you have the Russ Bears as they come in there at number 3. So you see it in terms of our overall post there. Russ Bears are at number 4, 13-3, 7-0, 37. They climb a spot after a very solid week doing 37. Let's bring it to number 3. West Virginia State Yellow Jackets, 15-2 in terms of what they're going on there. 41 points, previous number 4. They jump over a spot as they come in. At number 2, you have Florida Memorial, the Lions. They move up the spot as well, 14-3, 8-1, earning 1 first place vote, 55 points as they jump up a spot. Number 1 that continues to be number 1, holds on to the number 1 ranking, is none other than Tuskegee Gold Tigers, 15-3, 12-0, getting it done with 5 first place votes, 59 points. They continue to play some good basketball and get it done. That is your top 5 in week number 3 for the mid-major division of the women's basketball poll ranking. Charles, what are your thoughts?
Shout out to Russ College, ranked 23rd in the NAIA poll that came out. So they are the highest ranked NAIA, HBCU NAIA school in that regards on the women's side of the ledger. So shout out to Russ College with regards to that. What can you say about Tuskegee? They are as hot as any team out there. They've won 7 in a row. They won 9 out of the last 10. And it's, they're doing that Jackson State thing where they're beating teams and it's beyond the margin of error, if you will. So Tuskegee is playing tremendous basketball. Lincoln, they come in at number 5. They almost got upset the other night with regards to Virginia Union. Last second shot at the end, so they were able to sneak out of there 52-51. But I agree with the poll. Looks about right this week.
I do want to show some love for the other NIA program in there, Florida Memorial Lions.
Florida Memorial.
There, at number 2 in terms of what they're doing. But to your point, Russ Bearcats jumped in the poll last week and they continue to move up. So they might catch Florida and become that highest NIA program. So there's a couple of them in there. Florida Memorial sneaking around the chicken coop, if you would, to continue to play some good basketball, get things done. Would be interesting to see that type of matchup as you have 2 intra-conference matchups between the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference and Florida more over there in that Sun Conference, I believe it is, out of Florida getting it done. But a lot of stuff going on in women's basketball at the mid-major level. Big games coming up as Russ Bears is there playing those matchups, which looks good. What are your thoughts there, Charles?
Only one CIAA representative in that top 5. Huh?
You want more teams in the CIAA?
To me.
You want to jump in there? You got Fayetteville State, the next one up there.
I can't.
What would be the Southern Division? They're just sitting there less than 6. Who you want?
I can't jump a CIAA team in there. That's what's kind of catching my eye when you see those NAIA teams in there. Of course, what they're doing over in the SIAC with regards to Tuskegee, but as much as I want to jump a CIAA team, and I can't. Florida Memorial is playing great basketball. Russ is playing lights out basketball. So kudos to those teams at that level that are playing some great basketball.
Excellent point that you say there when you talk about that. The other thing that I love about the poll ranking that we happen to do for football, obviously, which is pretty obvious, but in terms of men's and women's basketball, which makes it so competitive to get in the top 5, which is what you were bringing up. You got the CIAA. They play great basketball at the Division 2 level. Mm-hmm. They can only get 1 in the top 5. That's what makes getting into the top 5 in terms of men's and women's basketball so spectacular and unique when you talk about this. And then the other thing is we get to talk about some of these matchups because you just don't get a lot of the NIA Division 2 matchups, but in a lot of ways, the scholarship differential is not that very far off in terms of the sport of men's and women's basketball. So there's a lot of talent in both these leagues. You got more HBCU programs playing in the NIA So it gives them a chance in a lot of ways, obviously, to get more marketing in terms of the basketball. In fact, as you know, we basically have a entire conference of HBCUs, an HBCU conference that has affectionately been known as the 5th HBCU conference that doesn't get a lot of talk about. So this is a chance for programs in the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference, if you would, to get talked about. Among those other ones, Langston and the Sooner Conference in terms of what they're doing on the national stage at the men's level. And then obviously the Red River Athletic Conference with a conglomerate of HBCUs, 5 programs over there, which makes it interesting, especially with Wiley College leaving this year to go to the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference. And then you have those programs out of the Southern South Conference with Talladega, when you look at it in terms of what they're doing out of Alabama, and then both Florida Memorial. So great points you make there when you ask that framework about how competitive it is to get in the top 5. With that being said, let's get into halftime. We'll come back to the other side and see what the difference is for the men's mid-major and see if some more CIAA programs can find a way to get it done on the men's side. We know that it's extremely competitive in the CIAA on the men's side, and they're playing some good basketball. They beat each other up. How does that affect the top 5 ranking? We'll see right after this break.
From novice to aficionado, find yourself here. High quality cigars plus personal customer service. Slow Burn is Waco's only mobile cigar lounge, featuring a meticulous, curated collection of premium cigars. Visit our website, www.slowburnwaco.com. That's www.slowburnwaco.com.
It's never too early to plant the seed, to share the tradition, and instill a sense of pride in your HBCU with your little ones. HBCU Pride and Joy Children's Boutique helps you share your school spirit with a wide selection of adorable kids' apparel and accessories officially licensed from your favorite HBCU. Visit hbcupridejoy.com and follow us on all social media at HBCU Pride Joy on Facebook and Twitter.
This is Brian Fulford. A.D. Drew and I are co-hosts of the BCSN Sports Wrap. We talk about all things related to HBCU athletics. From the games, teams, coaches, and fan interest stories, we cover it all. You can find our shows on Facebook at BCSN Sports Wrap, YouTube at MyJBN Online, and everywhere you listen to podcasts like Anchor, Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. You can also find the show on the Jericho Broadcast Network's app. Make sure to download. We look forward to you joining the conversation and being a part of the show.
We are making
Compress the analytic data with your hip-hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they want a lot, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
This is Dr. Cavil with Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Charles Bishop. He had another follow-up question as we're getting into some of this, and then Lennon Blow had a question as well, so I'll answer his. Charles, go ahead and get it in before we get into this mid-major for the top 5 of the poll. We'll kind of tease it out for a little bit to keep them on their toes. What was your question, Charles?
It's bigger, better. And that question revolves around Lincoln joining the Grand Lakes Valley Conference. They become the 15th member in that conference. And I guess the question sort of revolves around how do you not get lost in the shuffle, if you will, in terms of joining the conference, or from a branding standpoint, you're one of many. What does that mean for Lincoln?
Great thing. I think this is where you try to use your HBCU designation as a branding component. One of the things, if you on the release that they brought to the table, is that Lincoln, Missouri is an HBCU. So they're already trying to brand and talk about the acceptance of the Grand Valley Conference in terms of them joining it. The other thing is it said that they become a full member, which means they were partial members, which means they already played some sports in the conference. So now it becomes easier to keep up from creating rivalries when it's across the board in all sports, as you know. It becomes easier. It's easier for your fans to follow. They're not looking between 2, 3 maybe conferences for multiple sports. It's easier for your sports information folks to create those lines and talk about it in regards to how you talk about potential rivals that may create up. And then I'm sure in some ways there's probably some travel advantages in regards to being in this conference. So those are the things I think you talk about in terms of when you look at conference churning, particularly with Lincoln, Missouri, HBCU going into that Grand Valley Conference over there. With that being said, Leonard had a similar question, and we've had some of this talk before, but I think it's a good timing to talk about again since we're talking about this churning. Before we get in this top 5, Lennon asked, what do you all think about Virginia State, Bowie State, and Fayetteville State possibly joining the MEAC? And I think North Carolina A&T will be back eventually. Wow. Once they get their butts kicked in the CIAA, the Colonials, I like to call it, they will be back. Well, yeah, women's basketball would say a little different, track as well. But you're right. In other sports, they were traveling. And you talk about North Carolina A&T, Hampton has gotten off to a really bad start in a lot of their sports. Marginal at best, maybe you could say in football as they started out this year. But to your point, really was Virginia State, Bowie State, Fayetteville State. Personally, I love this type of matchup. You know, obviously the schools have to make the personal decision. What I like about the teams that you brought up, and I said a little bit as much so about that, and I like to see other folks' thoughts as Lennon asked everybody in the chat session, is you create natural rivalries if these schools come up. So obviously these schools have some rivalries in the CIAA, and one of the things you want to do is when you join a conference, obviously benefits in terms of travel, maybe extending your brand extension, going from Division II, Division I. You have a chance to have a bigger presence in terms of your brand in a lot of areas because of the programs you'll play, where MEAC is. Maybe not so much. Basketball is probably pretty equal in some brand aspects, at least with the tournament, how much rich history the CIAA has. But outside of that, in terms of what's going on, specifically when you look at the television partnership, in a lot of ways, maybe you can make that argument at Division I. But it creates new rivalries and extends rivalries that exist that can become played more often. For example, obviously, when you talk about Virginia State, you already have Norfolk State in the MEAC. So you have a rivalry there, but it may not be played as much. And the balance of that rivalry could be off because you have one program operating under Division II budget and scholarship, while the other one is Division I and FCF scholarship. So now you put a level playing field, at least of what they can offer Virginia State. That rivalry can boom, and it will do a lot for the conference. Similarly, Bowie State, obviously out of Maryland. So that Morgan State rivalry in football, all sports, and then in all other sports except for football, even with Maryland Eastern Shore to some degree. But really in terms of Morgan being in that geographic region, in that greater area in terms of Baltimore in the county there. It can be very fascinating in terms of what that rivalry do. Then obviously you go to Fayetteville State, North Carolina. You know where I'm going with it by now, North Carolina Central. So now you have a chance to create build up even more so that rivalry there. So you come in, now you have 9 programs. If you still get Chicago State, you're talking about 10. The other thing is if you get Chicago State, can you somehow maybe look at Missouri since they're on the move? Is a consideration to partner with Chicago State to get to a 12th, if you would, member in the SWAC in terms of 2 teams partner with Chicago State. So you go from 6 to 9, maybe it's 10. Maybe you just stay with Chicago State, maybe you stay with 9, or even obviously some talks with Kentucky State. They're struggling, so that's probably not likely. Maybe they partner with Central State and things of that. So if you could create some rivalry matchups, that would be nice. But again, the trouble you got, do those programs have the same energy that you have in terms of interest in moving up to Division I? And that becomes the big question. With that being said, let's get into top 5, and then we come back. I see a question in your mind when we come back for the last segment. we'll let you get that question out. So make sure you park it and register because we want to get the question. I know when you have a question. With that being said, let's get in this top 5. Dropping out this week is West Virginia State Yellow Jackets. They were really playing some good basketball. Hit a little bit of hard time. Not that much, but it's just so competitive with the NIA programs and Division II programs. It doesn't take much to drop out of the top 5. They're still 15-3, 9-3 in conference play, but they fall out of the top 5. So let's see who's receiving votes for Landon Smith, if you would. 13-2, 3-1 in terms of conference play. They are the top team receiving votes at 25. Virginia State Trojans out of the CIAA that you were mentioning for on the women's side earlier, 14-4, 7-2, playing some good basketball, but they're outside of the top 5. Think about that, 21. Miles Golden Bears, if you would. And Virginia State also dropped out of the top 5. I missed that as a program they were in there because it was 2 teams that actually dropped out. Miles Golden Bears, 15-4, 11-3, 15 votes. And West Virginia State, as I told you, dropped out. They dropped all the way out in terms of receiving votes. The lowest one there, 15-3, 9-3. So let's get in these top 5s and see who jumps in out of those 2 teams that jumped out. Who jumps in at number 5? Savannah State Tigers, 12-5, 20-3, 10-3, I should say. Yeah. 42 points were not ranked. They jump in at number 5, playing some tremendous basketball at the right time of the year. Can they continue this great boast of basketball they're playing? And then number 4, Virginia Union Panthers, that really started out hot. They dipped down a little bit, but they're back in the business of basketball this season, playing really good basketball, 16-4 in a rough and rugged CIAA, as you like to talk about. They sit at 6-2, 58 points. They were not ranked. Bringing us to number 3, we're still in the CIAA as you have Claflin Panthers, 14-3, 6-3. So the top team in the North, top team in the South are in the top 5. They even have one first place vote with 59 points, and they move up a spot this weekend to number 3. At number 2, Tougaloo Bulldogs are 15-1, 4-0, 3 first place, 74. At number 2, they're solid basketball program, playing good. If it wasn't for the Langston Lions, they probably would be number 1. But it is the Langston Lions that are at number 1. They are 18-1, 12-1, rebounded after a tough loss last week and continue to pound and win, particularly in the conference play, Sooner Athletic Conference, NIA. 4 first place votes, 76 points. So they continue to get it done. And they are your number 1. Langston Lions remain number 1 in week number 3 as they continue to chug along and get it done. Charles, I'm going to you. What do you think about the mid-major division of the men's side?
Shout out to Coach Eric Struthers, longtime SWAC assistant coach, Jackson State and Mississippi Valley State. They're getting it done over there at Tougaloo. Yes, people, there's one more HBCU in Jackson, Mississippi. It's not just Jackson State. The Tougaloo Bulldogs over there in North Jackson, about 10 minutes from my house. They are playing some tremendous basketball. So shout out to Coach Strutt. He has that team really playing off the charts. But, you know, the one that caught my eye is Miles dropping out. They were playing some great basketball, and then they dropped the one to Tuskegee last week. And so that was the one that caught my eye because that was a game that's coming up this weekend, a little rivalry game with Miles and Tuskegee. But I like the poll, especially Langston and Tougaloo sitting up there at the top. And, you know, it goes back to my question I think I asked last week, Dr. Cavil. These NAIA teams and the CIAA teams, what's the difference? Because you see Fayetteville and Claflin fighting it out down there in the Southern Division. You got Virginia Union up there in the North. You know, who is the stronger team amongst those 4?
In terms of what 4? What are you saying, Charles?
Looking at Claflin and Fayetteville State fighting it out in the South. And gotcha. I was saying when you take a look at those 2 teams,
in terms of division, top team 1 and 2,
and then you take the top 1 and 2 teams in the CIAA North and South, and then Langston and Tougaloo. Where do they stack up?
I like the way you broke it down in terms of those teams in their either divisions or in terms of the classification. Langston and Tougaloo, top NAIA programs, particularly in terms of our poll ranking. What do they look like? Will they get a chance to play each other? Will they see each other in the tournament maybe? NIA tournament because they're tracking that they certainly should get bids for those tournaments. And then obviously you got matchups, if not regular season, as things start to come to the end in terms of the CIAA tournament, as this is the first one up to be played. How are those divisional matchups going to match up? And when you talk about the top two teams in the division, Virginia State, Virginia Union, top of the Northern Division, you talk about Claflin, if you would, Fayetteville State in terms of their regional matchups in the Southern Division. What does that look like? How they're going to fight up? And then obviously you go into the SIAC with Savannah State coming out of that east over there, Miles College in terms of what they're doing in the West. Great points when you look at some of these matchups and break them down in the divisional play and in terms of their association classification. Great points. I love the way you broke it down and made that point there. Let's get into our last break. We'll come back on the other side, talk about some matchups this weekend, both at the Division I level and Division II level. What are some of the games that you have your eyes on? Before we do that, I know you had a question I asked you to park. When we come back out of the break, we'll let you ask that question. We'll get into the last questions you come back with, and then we'll finish out the show. Stick with us. We'll be right back after this break before we get into the fourth quarter. It's going down the stretch in terms of women basketball. You know, they play quarters, unlike men play half. Only sport out there where they play half instead of the quarters. I don't quite understand it, but that's the magic that we play in when we talk about college basketball, certainly at the Division I level. Stick with us. We'll be right back after this break.
We are making the virtual HBCU experience available wherever you live through Stillman Online. We offer online degrees in business, criminal justice, psychology, and religion. Stillman also offers technology badges in cybersecurity and data analytics. You can participate in all student activities, fraternities and sororities, internships, graduation ceremonies, and much more. Apply for admission today at stillman.edu. Stillman College, where we prepare you for a different world.
T. Madden and Associates is a sophisticated and experienced law firm located in your neighborhood. We're turning injury to cash.
T. Madden and Associates obtained almost $2 million for my injury. They turned my injury to cash.
Now, we can't guarantee how much your injury is worth, but we've recovered millions for our clients.
Call T. Madden and Associates at 833-PAID-123. That's 833-PAID-123.
From novice to aficionado, find yourself here. High quality cigars plus personal customer service. Slow Burn is Waco's only mobile cigar lounge, featuring a meticulous, curated collection of premium cigars. Visit our website, www.slowburnwaco.com. That's www.slowburnwaco.com.
Q Time is our classic Atlanta soul food restaurant located.
Press the analytic data with your hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they want a lot, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
This is Dr. Cavil's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Charles, I know you had a final question you want to get out there. Might have time for a couple. I should say final, but another question I should say that you wanted to get out there as we come back. I love the way you ask this question when you come back in the break, man. Keeping my input for sure. I'm like, I got to be ready. Charles is like, all right, we take you. Hey, we're going to see all that Dean you talk about. We're going to see if you still got a little skill with your professor. All right,
I know, right? Well, it just made me stop and think about when we're taking a look at the Chicago State Exploratory Committee, and it made me think about Tennessee State, where they sit, at this fulcrum, right in between the SWAC and MEAC. And, it just makes me wonder when you talk to a lot of their alums, talk to a lot of their alumni, there obviously is this fervor to see matchups against other HBCUs, but it just makes me wonder, where are they within this, conference churning, or are they, comfortable sitting outside of the conference churn?
I think in a lot of ways that depends on who you ask. We got Brandon King in here, Tennessee State alum, if you would, in terms of, so it'd be interesting to get his perspective. We talked about a little bit, had to take a deeper dive, and he writes for HBCU Go, does some columnist work, also freelancing for HBCU Sports. So I'm fascinating about his opinion. Got a chance to work with him. Incredible young man that is pushing forward and has a lot of great opportunities to do some things. He's a sneakerhead as well. So you can check out his website in terms of sneaker.com. Hopefully I'll put it in the chat so people can check it out. He did an article with the unveiling of, I think, one of the Jordan brand shoes that Howard University track coach did. Great story in terms of what he was able to do there. So if you get a chance, go check out that article. A lot of good stuff that he's doing, and continue to follow him. With that being said, he had a good question. But if we get a chance, maybe we'll get that in. Certainly those that are in the chat, check out Brandon King's question, as well as you had a chance to ask those questions with Lennon below there. Make sure y'all discussion. I love the discussion that goes back as we get into this. When we get a chance, we'll kind of pull this out. You know, we love to shout y'all out in terms of work that you put in, the support you do for us. But to answer your question about Tennessee State, I think in terms of that, again, a lot of that is in terms of who you ask, in terms of what that looks like, alumni, administration. And obviously it's pretty clear in terms of administration that they're pushing full ahead. They will keep up with some HBCU matchups in terms of the classic that they do in that matchup. Obviously they're in the Southern Heritage. That will feature now Arkansas Pine Bluff, as Jackson State is moving in a different direction. Homecoming, they're bringing Norfolk State. Obviously, you got the Big John Classic, where they tend to play at HBCU and try to keep that going. So it'll be fascinating to see what that looks like. But they announced the matchup with North Dakota State. Obviously, last year they had Eastern Washington. They had Kennesaw State, even though Kennesaw State is moving up to FBS. They played them this year, and then there was a return trip next year. Looks like they'll probably still try to honor and play that contract out as they're moving and transition to FBS. So that'll work out. So it looks like one of the things they want to do is play some of the top 25 teams, if you would, top 15 teams if at the FCS level to extend the brand. Obviously, you had a big matchup with Notre Dame, which is going to do a lot to the brand analysis of Tennessee State. Kudos, have to recognize that and give that up. But if you talk to a lot of the fans that you just casually meet, that you have, a lot of them would love to be in the SWAC. Most of them would love to be in the SWAC. Now, you go to their fan forum page, that concentrated crew, they like the direction. They're not really interested in the SWAC at that level. And so they would like to try to push out. A lot of those fans that do not necessarily want to join the SWAC are similar to what you've previously heard with some teams, the MEAC before the Celebration Bowl kind of took off, where they like the idea of the playoffs, being able to play in that, and the fact that it doesn't generate revenue is not an outlier for them. They still want to find a way to get it done. So money is not a generating factor in terms of the access to money to being in the SWAC. And so right now the rivalries are just not a big deal in terms of what it could be in terms of administration and fandom. I think it's interesting what that fandom looks like. Their engagement is different than me in terms of that. You see a decent amount of engagement in terms of how you would look at it in terms of attendance. It's pretty solid when you compare it to HBCUs, you know, top 5, top 7, certainly top 10. But if you look at engagement in terms of what you talked about Jackson State earlier, you don't see a lot of engagement with them on Twitter in terms of extending that brand. You don't necessarily see that engagement with HBCUs in that cultural family framework. If you even look at their page, all the interest is in football. You don't see engagement in basketball like you see in the SWAC in terms of, it lowers down in football, but you still see a pretty significant engagement in basketball. You see that here, as we discussed men's and women's basketball. You don't see much engagement on their page when you look at basketball. Obviously, they're not doing well in terms of conference affiliation as they get into it, but season, they started really well. I mean, they have a winning record on the men's side. Last year, they had a really good season on the women's side in a lot of ways, but you still don't get that engagement at all. And so, yes, it's naturally going to drop off the football with it being so big, but you don't see that. They don't have baseball, so you're not going to extend the engagement that you see in the SWAC with baseball, which you previously in the MEAC. You don't have that. And so those things become unique and challenging. So in a lot of ways, it depends on what are your goals for the athletic department in terms of where you're trying to match your sports with what you're trying to do with the overall view of the institution. And obviously from the leadership at this time, they want to stay the course, which is membership in the OVC and not in the SWAC. I will say this, while a lot of folks would see the interest in the SWAC, I think it becomes more challenging for Tennessee State to make a argument to get in the SWAC. And this is why right?
But the MEAC doesn't play into that as well. I mean, they're
I think the MEAC would be. I think it would be easier, but there are some travel concerns in the MEAC. If you go over in terms of South Carolina State, North Carolina Central, yeah, that's pretty straight. But the travel in terms of getting into the core of the MEAC in terms of Baltimore, it becomes a difficult in terms of distance for one, and then the way you got to travel, because remember you got the out going in there. So you got to go around it. There's not necessarily a straight shot coming out of Tennessee State up into Baltimore, Maryland. You got to kind of go around some things. So travel can be a challenge. So now you're talking about adding planes. And one of the things that they've always talked about not joining the SWAC because of travel. They like the travel, although we see this condensed. Even though in the SWAC now you talk about divisions, that argument is different because you're really just going to play the majority of stuff in your division alignment. And basically, in terms of your sports, you would have some crossover in football, but you travel like that as you see with your non-conference games. So I don't think in football it's really a big deal, but hey, it is what it is, and that's what they say. But what I was getting to in terms of the issue with them seeking membership in the SWAC as MEAC, where they're looking to grow, so it's probably easier there, no doubt, to your point. But the SWAC is, now the SWAC has the new television, right? And so with HBCU Go and Allen Media, they had that huge $1 million deal that came to the table for 10 years. So the current membership has already looked about how they're going to split that money between 12 members. And so unless you can see that Tennessee State will help aggregate extended media rights deal for ESPN when the primary rights, right, that were exclusionary rights, comes up for ESPN to renegotiate that, does that significantly increase the pie of what ESPN will give to the SWAC, what they are currently, plus an addition of Tennessee State? And again, I always push for this. If you're going to expand Tennessee State, you got to go to a 14th member. But again, I'll push out to Clark Atlanta, so at least you would justify the region, particularly now they're doing baseball, right? You're augmenting it in terms of that relationship, in terms of that. And so now you're splitting that pie even more. So let's just say for easier discussion here, you have $12 million, $120 million on television. You split that 12 ways, everybody gets an even share of that, right? Easy to divide 12 in the 120 million, you get 10 million for everybody, right? If you extend that to 13 members, as you obviously see, now that's 13 going to 12 without it increasing. So to expand to add Tennessee State, you're asking the current members to take less money unless you can see that the television deal is increased.
Yeah.
And they just negotiated the deal with HBCU Go. So you're not going to go back to the table and say, unless you had a clause in the contract that already escalated, which I doubt happened, right? You're asking teams to take less money. So unless you can go to ESPN, they can say, hey, we're looking at adding Tennessee State. What does that do to our numbers in terms of what you would have gave us before this? If we make this move and bring in Tennessee State alone, or Tennessee State and Clark Atlanta, what does that do to the television deal? So it's about money. If you can equal what I have or increase it, then it makes sense. If it's decreasing my value, it's going to be hard to get presidents to say what's going on. We're right at the time there, but I wanted to give you a chance for a matchup or two that you wanted to talk about before we close it out.
Whoa, for me, it's going to be definitely Miles and Tuskegee. When you take a look at them, both of them are playing some great basketball. Tuskegee with the upset of Miles last week. Miles gets the opportunity to take them on again this weekend, so I'll be calling that game. But you take a look at the top 4 teams in the SIAC, Doc. They've literally been playing some great ball. You talk about Miles over the last 10 games, 9-1. Savannah State over the last 10 games, 9-1. Tuskegee over the last 10 games, 8-2. They won 2 in a row. Savannah State won 4 in a row. And then out of Memphis, Lamont Owen. They've been playing some tremendous basketball as well. They've won 6 in a row. So out of the last 10, they're 8-2. So you got some great matchups over in the SIC that I'll be keeping an eye on this weekend.
Yes, good stuff. Good stuff when you talk about that. What's nice about that matchup, you said, that's when you can get interested in both for men's and women. In terms of both of them playing really good basketball right now. Yeah. So it's going to be incredible to see that matchup on both sides of what that looks like. I also wanted to say, again, a reminder that you have some big games that are on ESPN, obviously, with the MEAC in terms of what they're going. But you also have HBCU Go games out of the SWAC in terms of this week. Saturday, you have Jackson State at Grambling State, the doubleheader, starting at 12:30. In terms of women, men at 3 o'clock. And then on Monday, you have Alabama State at FAMU doubleheader with the women starting at 5:30 and the men starting at 8 o'clock. So that's a big deal there. Last thing that I did want to add this on the Tennessee State before we officially close it out. George Brown put up a petition on change.org in regards to President Glover asking for them to look about leaving the OVC for an HBCU conference. They didn't talk about the MEAC or SWAC. They just said for an HBCU conference. After 34 years, it's time for Tennessee State University leave OVC for HBCU conference. This was penned about a year ago when all that talk started about FAMU and Bethune-Cookman came. And so these are the things that I thought he made interesting. It always talks about me is looking at the compatibility in the conference. This has been spurred in small part due to change. Deion Sanders choosing to coach at Jackson State in 2020 and out recruiting other major top tier colleges. So wanted to look at taking advantage of that. But really what drew me into this, it says between 1960 and 1987, Tennessee State University Athletics spent 50 of its 71 years as an independent prior to joining the Ohio Valley Conference in 1988. TSU experienced moderate success in the OVC with 2 football championships, 2 men's basketball championships, 3 women's basketball championships, 5 indoor championships, 3 outdoor championships, and at that time when this was written, 2 volleyball. Remember, they won the volleyball that we talked about here this year, so 3 volleyball championships now, as well as the demise of its baseball programs 5 years after joining the OVC. So I'm always fascinated when you look at the competitiveness and championship as you measure it by that in terms of the conference. So tough in terms of what's going on there, but it looks like they're in it to win it, stick it out. They think change in terms of what Dr. Mickey Allen is doing, obviously with a lot of hope on the football, certainly in terms of what they're doing there. So it'll be fascinating to kind of see what that looks like. Any last question or statement that you want to make before we close out there, Charles?
No, looking forward to basketball this weekend. We're right in the middle of conference play, and the balance of power can tip in any direction. So it's looking forward to it this weekend.
Yeah, obviously they're excited about what Coach George is doing, and we shouted him out in terms of his comments of what's going on across the HBCU landscape with football coaches and understanding what it takes to be successful and really connecting yourself with the HBCU coach. With that being said, thank you for listening to Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Make sure you share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. I am Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, the Dean of HBCU Sports, coming from inside the lab in the College of HBCU Sports with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop. Mike Washington is on assignment. We'll check on him, make sure he's safe. Obviously, he tried to get in, but with the delay of the flight made it challenging. But we did want to make sure we shout out and give him some love. Again, we want to thank you for listening to Dr. Mills Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, in terms of what's going on here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 o'clock. Look forward to next week as we discuss the latest in the news. Follow me, Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. That's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab 1 on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at the Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Let me give a shout out. Ricky Burton, Brandon King. He put out sneakershop.talk.com. Again, that's sneakershoptalk.com. Chuck Hunt, always giving us much support. Silas Edward McMorris, David Barnett, Thomas White Jr. in the house, Dwight Shelton. That's Thomas White Jr. over Mogul Threads. working on the project. He's promised me he's getting there. He's making some designer stuff for inside the HBCU Sports Lab, the dean, the professor line, if you would. So we have that coming out where you signature line. Dr. Cavil is excited about what that will look like. Please keep up with us. We'll get that out to you. Dwight Shelton, Edwin D. Moore, you'll be able to look like a dean and professor yourself with the clothing line to come out and certainly be able to support us. Shout out to George Suggs. He's excited about his women's basketball program like he should be. He just talked about on here in the North Carolina A&T Capital Athletics Improvement Plan. It will be $100 million in place by 2023. Great to see and hear that. Much necessary needed in terms of to continue to grow the program. Jimmy Wilson, I should say, great questions. As he talked about some of those questions that came out earlier, wanted to give some respect there. Lennon is always getting in here and asking some great questions in terms of that. Dallas Weatherby, jumping in here, Thomas Einstein Maddox, as we continue, Edwin D. Moore, G. Boom Holly is in the building as always. Shout out to all those. Brother Wendell Davis getting in here. Michael Lee is in the building, big time partner of mine as we discuss the latest in HBCUs behind the scene. He's a great thought man, getting it out here, mixing it up and making sure people know his opinion, which is always needed and good. With that being said, let's close it out. Thank you all for the lab listening. Dream big, continue to move forward. We'll talk with you soon. Charles?
Of course.
Roy?
Lecture.
Dismiss.